there, I am Sarah Kolis. Welcome to the Dressing Up podcast, where we talk about all things bridal dresses and general dressing up topics. I love to encourage women to dress up while expressing their personal style with confidence on how to do so. Visit sarahkolis.com to book a bridal alterations fitting, or even inquire about designing the custom couture bridal gown of your dreams. I am so excited to talk to you about this next topic. Let's get started. Okay, you guys, it's happening. I am recording my first episode for my podcast. This is so exciting, so crazy, and I'm kind of a bit nervous. So this episode is supposed to be all about me. All right, so I'm not one to like to talk about myself a lot, but I guess I need to do that for you here and explain why I'm making this podcast, how I started doing what I'm doing, and where I see the future headed with this podcast. All right, let's start from the beginning. Born, raised, and I still live in Novi, Michigan. So it's a suburb of Detroit, and I do wedding dress alterations and a few custom couture wedding gowns per year. And I just love working with dresses all day long. I work with brides quite often. It's the best job. It is so much fun. Truly my dream job from when I was a little girl. So I am just thrilled to be doing what I'm doing. And I'm going to walk you through how I came to be doing this. You know, I do a lot of fittings day in and day out. And number one question I get asked is something along the lines of, how did you get started doing this? When did you start doing this? So I'm going to answer all of those questions here. So here we go. I have 3 sisters. I love all things dresses and all things girly and feminine. And I've been like that my whole life. I was like a super, super girly girl growing up. I did Girl Scouts. I loved wearing frilly dresses. I loved the color pink and everything you could imagine as the most girly girl. I have an older sister, Colleen, and she was more on the opposite end of the spectrum. She was like all about sports and running around, very active. So we were just like polar opposites. But at the same time, I always like looked up to her, wanted her to be my friend. And sometimes I wanted to be like her, not in the sports aspect, but I remember her like crying and throwing a fit every time we had to put a dress on for like a formal event or a holiday or something. And she would be kicking and screaming. And therefore I would be kicking and screaming, pretending like I wasn't excited to put on these frilly dresses and tights and shoes with little bows on them, pretending like I didn't enjoy that because she did it, but secretly I really did. Anyway, so that's her. And then I have 2 little sisters, Angel, Melissa. I used them as models growing up because they were always around. And before I had dress forms, I needed some sort of body. So they would model things that were way too big on them, but I needed something. They also wore, along with Colleen, wore dresses I made growing up, and was very kind of them because looking back, they weren't so great, but I guess none of us knew any better. So it was just a great experience. I made a mess of the dining room table all growing up, a mess in the basement, but especially the dining room table. My poor parents never had a dining room, a true dining room, but it was the sacrifice the whole family really made. And I'm so thankful for that. So anyway, growing up, I had a passion for dresses, loved to dress up, had my Madeline doll. Before I even learned how to sew, I would make little paper dresses for her. I'd like draw with a crayon and on this paper, cut it out, and then like staple it onto her. So she couldn't get it on and off. It was like a one-time use dress. But anyway, that's where I started. But I learned how to sew very young. I swear I was born knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to learn how to sew. And I think my initial interest before I could even remember came from my Aunt Diane. And I remember watching her sew at her house on her kitchen table, and I admired that so much. And I remember just like watching her and being so impatient to learn what she was doing, but my fingers weren't quite nimble enough. But as soon as they were, I jumped right on the opportunity. So the very first sewing project I ever did, it was from one of those learn how to sew children's books. It was, after dance class one day, my mom took us to the cute little toy store down there in downtown Milford. And, of course, let us pick out a toy. And what did I pick? This Learn How to Sew book, which is so funny, a child picking that out. But anyway, I did this little strawberry shaped pincushion for my Aunt Diane. So that was my very first sewing project, and I gifted that to her. And I believe she still has that. So that was really special. And then she let me jump on and learn how to sew on her sewing machine. So that was really exciting. And I remember that moment so vividly because I was really frustrated. She had me sit on her lap and like I moved the little scrap fabric through the sewing machine, but I was so frustrated because she was operating the foot pedal. And I was really disappointed that I couldn't do the full thing. I'm like, let me do that. I want to do the foot pedal. And she's like, your feet can't reach there. I wasn't quite big enough to push on the foot pedal. But it was just so funny, just like how passionate I was. Even at that moment, I was like frustrated I couldn't do the whole thing. So anyway, that's a vivid memory of mine. And this was, keep in mind, all of this was all before I even learned how to write my own name. Like I was very young, which is what I think helped strengthen me so much. I always say I'm very fortunate to learn how to sew as an adult because I don't think I would have had the patience as a child. But it took years and years and years of practicing and making mistakes and doing it over and just learning so much over all the years that I'm very fortunate that I learned how to do all this before I was an adult. And then going to the Novi Sewing Expos, that was always so much fun. It was like the one day of the year that my mom always let me skip school. So Aunt Diane would take me to the sewing expos and I would buy all these awesome supplies and we'd like go to these classes and learn all these awesome things. So I learned a lot from those women growing up. The teachers there, it was, oh my God, it was sewing heaven. And I still go. It's still an awesome sewing expo. It's just so much fun. A lot of sewing is a lot self-taught too. You just got to practice on your own. So I did that a lot, made my doll clothes. Before I knew it, I was making my own clothes. I always had a passion for the clothing side of sewing. Of course, I did the quilting and all the other things, but I always loved the clothing. So doll clothes and then my own clothes. Like by second grade, I was making some of my own clothes. And I did just about every craft that you could possibly think of growing up. Sewing, obviously, knitting, crocheting, embroidery, needlepoint. I took some like fine art classes, jewelry, weaving, like those like little Capri Sun bags that were cool back then. I did Swedish stitching, like literally everything. Or origami. Oh my gosh, that was a big one. I was so big into origami. It was like I was a weird child, but it helped my brain so much. I think I did, I was like crazy about origami. I was so good at it. I would just take little pieces of scrap paper anywhere I was and just like do all these crazy folds and things. Anyway, so I took some art classes. I took these recreational sewing classes every year in the summer, just through the Novi Resource Center or wherever it was. But it was always fell on 4th of July week. And my birthday is July 6th. So I was always taking a recreational sewing class on my birthday, which was like heaven for me. Like what could be more fun? It was like the best thing ever. I just had a blast. That was really cool. So sewing and actually knitting were my big childhood hobbies. So I actually was also insanely good at knitting. That was like another thing of mine. I knit like crazy. I made all these like cool ponchos and sweaters and of course all the scarves for all of my family members. I would even dabble in making my own knitting patterns. There was this one out west trip that my family took, and like I mentioned, my doll Madeline, and made clothes for her. I brought my knitting needles, crochet needles, all this yarn, and just knitted away on that road trip. And we stopped at every Joann's that I saw outside the window of the car to get more yarn because I'd run out. So by the end of that trip, Madeline had a whole new wardrobe, but it was so much fun. So I was, making myself clothes. They were awful looking back, but I would gift my friends clothes for their birthdays. So that was funny, but just, I don't know. I just had the craziest childhood in this way. And saying all this stuff out loud is like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? I guess all of these things needed to happen for me to get to where I am now, but it's just like saying it out loud is weird. Anyway, so we bought my sewing machine. So of course I started practicing on my mom's sewing machine that never got used before I started using it, I'm sure. So we bought my sewing machine at Joann's. It was a Lena Husqvarna sewing machine. I was so excited. I remember they always give you like a class when you buy a sewing machine there that you go to, and they teach you like how to thread the bobbin and all the different stitches and things like that. And I caught on pretty quick. I loved that sewing machine. It had like this yellow bits to it with all these cute little flowers and things. It was really cute. Anyway, so also I made my mom a coat at age 8. All right. How many 8-year-olds have made their mom a coat? It's still hanging in their front hall closet. It's bright pink. It's not the cutest thing, but I did that. All right, then we're moving on. So the summer before 5th grade is when we bought my serger. So I remember that. So going to Joann's and telling the sales lady what I wanted, and we're going through the sergers, and she's telling me about this one and that one, and kept trying to convince me to get the base model, which was the cheapest. And my parents told me to get what I wanted, which is so sweet. Thank you, Mom and Dad. I love you. This is just like crazy that you bought, how old was I? Maybe like 8 or 9-year-old kid. $500 serger is what it ended up costing. But the sales lady there just thought I was crazy, like this little kid coming in buying this serger. Like, what little kid has a sewing machine, let alone a serger? Do you guys even know what a serger is? Maybe you don't, but my sewing friends do. Anyway, it's like this specialty machine that makes this nice stitching edge. So anyway, I just remember trying to be convinced by the sales lady that I either didn't need one or I just needed the base model. But of course, I went up a couple levels just to make sure I got what I needed. And guess what? I still use that serger to this day. So that's been quite the investment. And then I went on and made all of the clothes that I wore the first week of school in 5th grade. So 5 outfits. I had them all planned out all summer. Why did I do that? I don't know. But I wore them to school every day. And of course, I didn't tell my friends. I think a couple girls knew, but it wasn't a big deal. But I always told my teachers, because my teachers loved looking at them, and they would tell the other teachers, and it was just like a whole cute thing. But I knew by 5th grade that sewing wasn't the coolest thing and started keeping it to myself a little bit. Side note, 5th grade is where I met, well, not officially met, but I knew who my now husband was. He had a locker right next to my best friend, so that was funny. We started dating when we were 15, never broke up, got married in 2019, and now we're married. So anyway, I met him that year. So he probably saw some of my outfits now that I'm thinking about it. As a child, I'd also submit some of my clothes to the state fairs, the sewing expo competitions. I always won all these awards. Honestly, I'm sure I didn't have much competition, but it was fun. And it was fun to be a part of those contests. All right, before we knew it, my mom took some of my clothes that I had made to Joann's and was showing the women working there the clothes that I had made, and was trying to convince them to sign me up for the adult classes, 18 and up, and they wouldn't let me in. So no adult classes for me, but my mom turns around and there's this woman, Vicky, and she says, oh, I'll teach her. You know, we'll do private classes. So we did. So I went over to Vicky's place and she'd teach me how to sew. For years, we did that. And what was great about her is she taught me all of the quality about sewing. So before that, I was sewing for the sake of sewing and sewing to complete the project. But Vicky really taught me how to slow down and how to properly put in a zipper and how to care about what the inside of the dress looks like and all those things. So shout out to Vicky. I love you. You taught me so much. Thank you. All right. We're still in 5th grade. My goodness. Okay. So in 5th grade, I also launched a knitting club with my teacher, Mrs. Mardigian. We started a knitting club that ended up being quite popular. And that was a ton of fun. I didn't get much knitting done during those clubs because I was teaching everybody else, but that was just awesome. So then I continued on growing up and sewing on my own. And of course, you know, my family knew and my close friends, but I knew not to tell people at school and things like that. I knew that they didn't understand it and it wasn't worth it. And I enjoyed it so much on my own that it didn't matter. So 15 years old, I started dating my now husband, Billy. And I remember it being a big deal for me to tell him that I have this hobby of sewing. And I consciously didn't tell him until about 6 months into the relationship, just to make sure it wouldn't scare him away. And it didn't. And he certainly got himself into something with me. And now doing all that I do, it's just, I'm sure it's fun for him, right? Hopefully. So I made my homecoming and prom dresses. All that was super fun. I took all the like high level art classes in high school, loved that. And I loved my art classes growing up too in elementary school. And it's just so funny that my elementary school art teacher also ended up being my high school art teacher. She transferred just in the nick of time, and I was able to have her all growing up. So shout out to Mrs. Harvey. And in that class, she let me do whatever I wanted. I made a dress out of chip bags and a Band-Aid dress, and her and Mrs. Harbar were so supportive in getting me the supplies I needed and encouraging me to do basically what I wanted to do. And I've found over the years that what I always want to do is usually also what I'm good at and ends up being the most successful projects. All right, so now we're moving on to college. So I do have a BFA in apparel and textile design from Michigan State University. And in college, I had two particular projects that I really ended up enjoying quite a bit. And one was this dress made of what looked like mirrors. So it was like the coolest dress with all these different hard shapes that I put together and made this dress that it looked like a disco ball walking down the runway. It was the coolest thing. The other dress that I made in college was this cool paper dress. So we were tasked with making a dress out of plain white paper that they had provided and doing something unique with it. So what I decided to do, which ended up costing me quite a bit of time, was making a dress out of woven paper that was first twisted together. So I would take these long strips of like 1-inch wide paper and would hand twist it and have all these strings that I eventually wove into a dress on a dress form. So that one was wild. And then my now brother-in-law, Ryan, he was watching me and he's like, why don't you just use a hand drill and like stick the paper in the hand drill and twist it? And I'm like, that would never work. And I tried it and it was perfect. Anyway, saved me a ton of time. All right. And then while I was in college, of course, going back to the sewing expos in the fall, I signed up for the Passion for Fashion Challenge, which was basically like a mini Project Runway competition of 12 people. So my third year doing it, I won the whole thing, first place. So I won my sewing machine that I now use every single day, my Baby Lock Aria. I love it. So that was really nice because it was right around the time where I kind of needed a sewing machine upgrade anyway. So that worked out great. Business-wise, so I first started my business. I got my LLC right when I turned 18, did a couple little things before that, but I really launched my business with t-shirt quilts. Okay, so in high school, you get all these t-shirts, and I turned my own t-shirts into quilts and then ended up doing that as a little side gig during college. And then also in college, I did Fashion Week Las Vegas. So that was my first like pretty legitimate fashion show. It was so much fun. I had a total of 11 pieces in there. So it was in August, right before that. Oh, that would have been my sophomore year of college. Yes, my middle year. And 11 pieces walked down the runway. So I worked on all those pieces throughout the summer. And my parents drove me out there because I had all this stuff to load up into the car. It would have been too much to fly with, and I took that mirror dress with me. That was so much fun. Oh my gosh, I loved it. That was really cool. And I actually remember the pre-party the night before the fashion show was at this really cool club, and I was only 20 years old, and they were going around and checking IDs. And I was never one to sneak into bars, but for that one, I kind of had to watch where the bouncers were and run from them. Anyway, so college I completed. Let's go through the degrees I have. We're like going all out here. So I have a BFA in apparel and textile design. I have a BA in business administration. And then I'll get back to why, but I have an MBA and MSM master's degrees. So I graduated college and wasn't thinking and that I wanted a fashion job, but not leaving this. I like living in Michigan, so I was trying to find jobs. And what do I stumble upon? Eventually, I ended up in the auto industry pretty quickly. So, I was talking to my brother-in-law who was working at this automotive seating supplier, and he's like, oh, they have this room there with all these sewing machines. It's so cool. You would think it's awesome. And I'm like, what? What's that? So I applied for a job there as a trim technician, like a trim developer. Oh my gosh, I fell in love with it immediately. It was so cool. So for 6.5 years, I ended up making the patterns for car seats. So I would use pattern design software and make the shapes that would then be turned into cut pieces and sewn into a car seat and built. And I worked with the team all through that process. And that was so much fun, but very different from what I grew up doing in the aspect of materials and what I was making. So it was very similar to making dresses, but also very different. And I loved working there so much, but eventually I got to the point where I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And this dream job of what I'm doing right now was always lingering in the back of my head. And I worked really hard to make it happen. So I left the auto industry in February of 2022. So it was just recently. And I have been just loving every moment since, working with brides, working with their families, fitting the dresses, and helping to make their dream dresses come true. I think what helped make me successful in the auto industry and with dressmaking is that I use both the left and right sides of my brain. So I love being creative and being artistic so much. Like, I love thinking out of the box and solving problems and overcoming challenges. But I also have the technical side of my brain to be able to execute and turn my vision into real life, and love geometry. I've always been good at that. And I feel like in another life, I would have been like an architect or an interior designer, or something of that sort, in which I would still be able to use both sides of my brain. So let's talk about what projects and styles I like the best. Okay. So I hear this all the time. People are like, do you see some like really crazy dresses, or like, what are your least favorites? And honestly, there's no such thing as an ugly wedding dress. Like, I love seeing all the different styles. And I feel like brides walk in as complete strangers, and I open up their dress and I'm like, okay, I kind of like know your personality a little bit already, just seeing the dress that they picked out, which is so much fun. My personal favorites, though, I'm a ball gown girl. I had a ball gown for my wedding dress, and I just love, like, the bigger the better for me. I feel like it's something you can never wear any other time in your life, so why not? And I love high neck styles. I love lace. I love anything silk, which, I'm going to make a whole podcast episode on this, I'm sure, eventually, but silk does not equal always something shiny. Okay, so there's all different kinds of silk fabrics that aren't found too much in today's store-bought dresses. But anyway, that's a whole other day. So some other hobbies that I enjoy just on a personal level, I love yoga, hot yoga specifically. I like baking. I'm a cat lover. Those are some things about me. Also, so June 2019, my wedding, I made my wedding dress. And if you go on my website, there's like a whole blog about it. If you come visit me in my fitting room, I have a little article sitting on the windowsill that you can pick up. But that was a big project. So I spent 415.25 hours just making my wedding dress. I did all this beautiful tambour beading on the outer layer of the fabric, ball gown style, made all these little understructures to get the shape that I wanted, did a lot of historical research to figure out exactly how they did those back in the day and how I wanted it to look on me. Tried that thing on a million times, my goodness. Did a whole like pre-wedding photo shoot. It was like the best thing ever. Put a little bow on it. I had this gorgeous silk Duchess satin sash with a big bow in the back. Oh, it was gorgeous. I loved it. Lots of stories on that. Maybe we'll save that for another episode too. Also, I made all the bridesmaid dresses too. So you can check all of that out on the blog. Anyway, so why did I name this podcast Dressing Up? I felt like there were all these topics I wanted to talk about, and all of them kind of stayed under the umbrella topic of just purely getting dressed up. I feel like if I'm an expert on anything, it is dresses and all the tips and tricks of getting dressed up. I feel like getting your dress to fit properly isn't just about sewing, and it's not just about what decisions we make to make it fit, but also there's other things that go into it. And I feel like the world and society has moved away from dressing up often, so that when we do, I feel like people don't know the ins and outs of doing that. And it's something a little bit out of the normal realm. I feel like there's a lot of education I can do on these topics, and also just like weddings in general. my goodness, like weddings in general, like that is huge topics that I feel like you could learn something from it. Like, I think it would be really cool to interview either people that work in the industry or brides that, just had a wedding, and like tips and tricks from them, things that are like the sides of the industry we don't normally hear about. Like, we go on Pinterest and Instagram and see all these gorgeous photos, but there's so many backstories to weddings, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies. And I feel like I can help people prepare for their big day and make it better in any way that I can. So I'm excited to do that. I personally love dressing up. I am not a dress down kind of girl. How I dress is how I express myself. It's my identity. I love wearing clothes, quality clothes I made. It's a passion for me. I really enjoy it, and I like to help other people find their identity and express themselves through their clothing, specifically formal dresses and wedding dresses. And I feel like I can be a great help in that way, and helping people achieve the true vision that they're looking for.
Gosh, one more thing. How did I get into bridal specifically? My goodness, I almost forgot to touch on this. So I worked at David's Bridal and Alterations during my summers of college. I was looking for a summer job, and I drove by David's Bridal, and I'm like, that could be fun. Let me go grab an application. So I go and do that, and I eventually come back to turn it back in, and I'm waiting there at the desk, and my soon-to-be manager was running by, all busy, and I said, I want to just turn in the application, and she goes, can you sew? And I'm like, yes, of course. And she's like, no, can you sew? And I'm like, yes, of course I can sew, yes. And she repeats herself again. She's like, so you can sew? And I say, yes. So eventually I got into the alterations department, and that was a blast. I was so excited. I actually dreamed as a little girl, the most fancy dress is a wedding dress. And I thought that work was reserved for the best of the best seamstresses. Those were the best sewers there is, and there's no way I could ever be that good. And wow, what a treat to be doing what I'm doing now. And it is so exciting. So anyway, I worked at David's Bridal, and then eventually was taking on some of my own clients and did some custom dresses and things of that nature. But that's how I got into bridal specifically, and I've loved it ever since. It is so much fun working with brides on a dress that they wear on most likely one of the most important and most enjoyable days of their entire life. So it is truly an honor, and I never take that lightly. I know how big of a deal this is, and I really try to make each experience for each bride something that's just truly once in a lifetime. It is just so much fun.
So throughout the rest of my podcast episodes, I'm so excited to teach you more about dresses and weddings and formal events. I'm excited to interview others and learn more from them. And I'm really excited to help you learn how to dress up and have the confidence to do so. So, of course, you can check out my website, sarahkolis.com. If you ever have any ideas for episodes or topics, let me know, or you have particular questions. I'm always jotting down notes on things I can talk about. So just let me know. But yeah, that's all about me. I think I hit on everything. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks so much. All right, I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode has allowed you to approach the world with greater confidence in your own personal style. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out through email or inquiry form on the website. I hope you are all ready to go and get dressed up. I look forward to sharing more dressing up tips with you in future episodes. See you there.